Welcome to Better Together, a Vaishnava family podcast.
A podcast where we explore family life from a Bhakti Yoga perspective. We are your hosts. I'm Aksh.
And I'm Gopika. Welcome to episode 25. When our kid asked to sleep in a box. We found ourselves, I think as parents often do, in a situation that brought up a lot for us. And it seemed pretty simple, but we ended up feeling quite torn by the whole thing. Just quick background. Our son is very into houses. In our home, he often constructs houses in various rooms of the house with different structures and nuggets and couches and whatever. So on this particular day, he constructed this apartment for himself. And in it, he made himself a bed out of a cardboard box and filled it with soft balls and pillows and blankets. And he was extremely excited about this. As we're cleaning up and getting ready to go to bed, he is like, I want to actually sleep in my box. Yeah. Can I actually sleep in it? Like all night? Can I actually sleep in the box? I just felt like this ugly knot in my chest.
I'm curious to hear because you said so much came up for you. Like, what came up for you?
Yeah. I think that when I feel that like knot in my chest, it's like generally some sort of conflict. So my gut response was like, no.
Yeah.
I'm hesitating in the moment because I'm like feeling this knot. Well, who wants their kid sleeping in a box, okay? It does not feel right. Anyway, so I started to be in my head as he's persistently being like, Can I actually? Because I was like hesitating. I was like, okay, why am I saying no? One part of it was like fear of what happens when my kid is tired in the morning. Because our kid being highly sensitive, if we're tired, just everything is harder. It's way harder. I think that the early years were so intense for me. And because I was shouldering so many of those tantrums and the intensity, I think sometimes my body sparks this like response, like this really protective sense of like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And is it going to spark this intense tantrum? And can you handle it? Even though in my head, I know I'm capable of handling meltdowns, but it's just like an automatic thing that comes up.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. Yeah. I also knew that either choice was not a wrong choice. You can justify either side. Letting him sleep in the box would also be supporting his creativity, his independence, his autonomy, his enthusiasm, giving him power. And for our kid whose power cup needs to be filled very often and has a very large power cup, I would say, like this sense of feeling that control for him is really important for his happiness and regulation. So that would be really good. But I'm still like feeling uncomfortable, right? While I'm sorting this out, I'm seeing if maybe he can come to saying no by himself.
Yeah. Well, we were trying to make a list, right?
Yeah.
Here are the pros, here are the cons.
Yeah. And obviously there weren't many pros to sleeping in the box, but there were a lot of cons. But he was still not buying it. Yeah. I'm curious to hear like where you were in your head. But for me, it got to this point where like, okay, I can't subtly persuade him now. And so if I'm going to assert this no, then it's going to be like a power move on my behalf. I don't have the greatest reason in the world for it to say no. Nothing's going to hurt his body in one night sleeping in a box. And he's willing to deal with all the discomfort. He's aware of all the cons. If I were to prevent him at that point, that would be a total power move. And I wasn't feeling okay about that.
Yeah.
But I'm still like grumpy that he's sleeping in a box. I just hate that he was sleeping in a box, you know? Yeah. And so I started being like, fine, all right, basically you'll have to learn on your own kind of attitude. And then interestingly enough, in that moment, this thought occurred to me. And I just envisioned him as an adult. If my adult child were to be sitting in therapy talking about his mom, what would he say about me? In this story, if he was looking back at his childhood and he remembers this night that he built this box and he wanted to sleep in it and he went to his mom, what would he remember about me in that moment? And then I thought, oh my gosh, in this moment, he probably feels like I'm not on his side. You know, I'm like, fine, all right, learn on your own. That type of attitude. I'm letting him make his own choice, but I'm not being his teammate in that sense. So even though everything in my head was like, why is this kid so wanting to sleep in a box? Why does he have to be like this? You know, I'm like, I don't want him to remember me as his mom not being on his team. And so I just tried to do a massive override of my feelings and be like, all right, can I bring you anything? Can I get you a blanket?
Yeah.
Can we get some pillows?
Yeah.
How about your sound machine?
Yeah.
And we set him up in his box. So that's kind of like the whole whirlwind that was going through my head as this all unfolded. And I'm curious, what was going on in your head? Did you have your own thought process, or were you kind of like were you leaning on me to make the decision? Because sometimes that does happen, right?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I think when he first asked, I didn't really believe that he even asked that. And then when I realized he was serious, I was kind of neutral to it.
Yeah.
He was so determined that it was kind of either he's going to do it or you're going to try to put him to bed kicking and screaming and he's not going to sleep anyway.
Yeah.
So I just felt like it was not ideal in either direction. A lot of times for these kinds of things, for me, it comes down to balancing between control with what I think is right and
that
giving
control.
up that sense of control. For me, like maybe the first thought, thinking no in my head, because I'm thinking about, you bought you such a nice bed.
Yeah.
And then like you brought up the repercussions to the next day. But I was kind of starting to get a little antsy. And then when you made that point about he might feel like he's unsupported.
Yeah.
Then I also backed off and I started helping him. And something was weird that he just felt at ease. He's like, oh, they're helping me out.
Yeah.
And then he actually went to sleep.
Yeah.
And stayed asleep the whole night.
Yeah, he did. He absolutely did.
So I guess we get these kinds of requests sometimes, right? Where they're pretty unreasonable, right? From an adult perspective. But at the same time, you want to say yes as much as you can to your child. So how do you know when to say yes and when to say no? I mean, this is something that I'd be curious to hear your thoughts. Like, what are some of maybe our guiding principles as parents to navigate these situations?
When I think about these situations, it's like there's no universal flowchart. If the kid asks, hey, do this and then do this, right? I'm trying to lean into this more and more. This has to be what we feel about our child and not the Instagram parenting advice of the millions of people out there, you know? Yeah. Because for our son, the more we get to know him, he is an extremely spirited, independently thinking guy. Yeah. And so for him in this moment, if we as parents want to accept him and support him and make him feel like he's being embraced, unconditionally loved for who he is, then in these moments, I have to say that's like an important weighing factor. And we show that love and acceptance through our support of a crazy idea that doesn't feel right or doesn't fit the norm. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
as long as it's not too
dangerous,
unsafe.
Right? Yeah. Of course, there's always a line of danger and safety. And I think that's the other thing is that we are bombarded with so many requests and many requests are very clearly unsafe. So we're in battle so much that sometimes it's just like this automatic, like, oh, not another battle. Like, why can't you just listen to me? Like, I have your safety in my interest. That's like the automatic response rather than stepping back and being like, wait a second. Okay, there's actually really nothing unsafe about sleeping in a box for a night, right?
Yeah.
So I think thinking about his temperament was like one thing I thought. And then, you know, really wanting him to feel we are on his team, not that we are against him or squashing him.
Yeah.
That was a value for me as a parent and a priority that I want to accept my kid and not put my version of who he should be on him. And here I am as a parent doing that in the subtlest of ways, you know, because our kid is not who we expected him to be. He's very different. So I'm being challenged to really put my money where my words are. What's the saying? I never get them right on the podcast. Put my money where my mouth is. Yeah. So that was a second. And then it's like the third thing I was thinking is obviously my own stuff, what's coming up, is it an emotional response? And my emotions are valid. I've heard, blanking on what psychologist said this. They were just talking about decision making and how your emotions are actually really important and they shouldn't be discounted. And sometimes emotions, especially in the Indian culture, I find are kind of put to the side. Oh, you're being too emotional. Think with a logical head. But emotions are really important. And so our emotional response is really important. However, they only get one seat at the table of decision making. They never get the final say. And I think about that so much. And even in this situation, I had an emotional response. Had I let that emotional response have the final say, I would have said no.
Yeah.
And it would have been a loss, a lost opportunity.
Yeah.
I want that to be a guiding principle for me when we are confronted with this request. What's going on for me on the inside? What is my emotional response? Why is it saying what it's saying? What information is it giving me? And what are the other factors involved to make the decision?
Yeah. Oh, I really like that one seat at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah. It shouldn't be overpowering the rest of the council, so to say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it should also have a voice in the council.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you, though, for me, I think this would be really important. How can we practically be on the same page in these situations? Because they happen really fast, and they happen without warning. They happen unexpectedly. You're cleaning up. It's bedtime. There's a million things going on. Everyone's tired and stressed. And then your kid asks to sleep in a box. And there's all this stuff happening. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like, in all honesty, maybe a little alone in making these decisions. Like I just feel like it's all on my shoulders and I don't know what you're thinking and you kind of just lean to me or follow my lead. But I wanted to ask you, how can whatever decision we arrive at feel like it's coming from mama and papa as a team?
Yeah. Well, I can't really read your mind.
Yeah.
So I think that if we feel like we can't figure it out by looking at each other, and
which we never can.
But sometimes we kind of know, we both feel uneasy about something. But I feel like, we maybe need to ask for a sidebar or something. Because it's only fair. You and I need to talk about it. In terms of how I was thinking could be a way to approach it, and I don't know if this answers your exact question here. I guess sometimes we know what we would prefer. Yeah. And maybe in those cases, we are mostly on the same page. Like, I think the box is not.
Yeah, that's not our preference, of course.
Thinking a stepwise cascade of first response could be, that's interesting. I was picturing blah, blah, blah.
Or tell me more.
Try
to be curious about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason I said the I was picturing is because maybe the first response, we are a little bit trying to assert the situation. And sometimes he's okay with that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's good. And maybe we can kind of move on and get to bed and go to sleep and get some rest. But then if we get that resistance, then we can pull back a little bit more. And then it can be like a more collaborative thing. Let's work together, make that pro-cons list.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit more of that.
I like this approach better because I feel like what we did in the box situation, and I think both of us did this, and maybe we were feeding off of each other, but we were tired and our preference was, I don't want to deal with him sleeping in a box because who knows what can of worms that's going to be.
Yeah.
So our initial step 2 after that was not to be curious. It was actually to subtly dissuade.
Yeah.
But I like your approach of maybe that. But even after the pros cons list, I think practically, though, I would be nice to just have a step in there being like, okay, thanks for sharing. Now Mama and Papa need to discuss and we'll let you know in 2 minutes.
Yeah. I don't necessarily want to go down every time the route of let's make a pro cons list and work together. And,
exactly.
Too much discussion per se and almost too much autonomy and confusion. Yeah. But at the same time, that's what I took away a lot was kind of the dynamicness of that situation.
Yeah, he really cared about this.
Yeah. And so we tried different things, but you could just tell that
wasn't letting it go.
It wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. To your point about the other situations, I also think that we are also in a relationship with him where many of the times we're thinking about him and how he can feel regulated and how he can feel supported. I think sometimes it's also okay to honor the emotional response within. Not all the time. Not that it rules and dominates over everybody's life in our home. But if I'm tired and I just can't deal with this right now,
Yeah.
sometimes it's okay for that to be a good enough reason.
Yeah.
Maybe not all the time,
Yeah.
but on occasion, my energy matters too as a member of this family, as mama in the house. I think it's important for our kids to value parents as human people and relationships and not just dispensers. I always beat myself up over feeling selfish. If I'm like saying no and it's actually really about me, and then I end up feeling a bit of guilt about it.
Yeah.
But I've been trying to also think about it from another direction, that this is a relationship where I matter too.
Yeah.
Not that I matter all the time in that sense, but our kids need to learn that other people and relationships matter.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah. I like these ideas though. Being introspective, being aware of that emotion, being curious about it, being collaborative about it, stepping away and making sure we have a little conference and are on the same page about it.
Yeah.
So where do you feel like Krishna's role is in these situations? So many of these decisions, they happen so fast, so on the fly. How do we invite Krishna into these moments and feel like, okay, this is not just about me and you as mom and dad, but like we're really acting as instruments of God in service to our child?
Yeah. It's a good question. Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind is trusting one's instinct. And what I'm trying to say is it's kind of like a lower instinct and a higher instinct, if you will. The lower instinct is like that, maybe you were mentioning emotional or more ego kind of response of that wanting to control. But there's like this other instinct that's more dharmic, if you will. It's more like, I know as a parent, I have a responsibility here. And I can feel what is the right thing to do.
You feel like that's like mind versus intelligence?
It could be, perhaps. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. But where does Krishna play into this? Because you're talking about higher instinct, lower instinct.
Yeah.
But where does our relationship with God and this idea of we're caring for his child in one sense, being instruments of service, how does that come into play in these moments?
Yeah. I think there's a verse, chapter 8, text 7 in the Gita that he talks about doing your particular service, but thinking of him as you do it. And he's not actually talking about thinking of him per se while you're doing it. Because in the case of Arjuna, it's not saying think of me as you're trying to aim your arrow.
Yeah.
But the idea is that...
Or think of me while you're trying to figure out to say yes or no to your kid in the box. Like, what? How does that even work, right?
Yeah. I think it comes down to trying to stay connected to Krishna. Maybe it is a small prayer in the moment, if there's even a chance for that. But it feels like in order to act from the place we were just describing, from that healthier place,
higher instinct,
you have to kind of be living in that higher mode more often to then be able to respond in that way.
Like be tuned into that frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think praying regularly, I know for me, when we go to temple, that's one of my standard prayers is, please help me take care of my kids this week in a way that is kind and compassionate and right for them and supportive of them. And because I do feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Like the box situation, it's like, I don't know what to do, right? I also think it's also trusting what bubbles up, because when I was reflecting on it, right, in the moment, I felt really uncomfortable. It felt bad to feel conflicted in the moment. But when I was reflecting on it, I was like, wow, that conflict that I was feeling was actually a great thing.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe that feeling of confliction was actually Krishna. That was God from within. That was Paramatma. And when I was thinking about it more, like I remember, I think it was Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu one time said something like, when Krishna's trying to tell you something, when God's trying to send you a message in life, you'll probably hear it from multiple places. I think that makes sense. A lot of people are kind of, the universe is trying to tell me something. You know, I see it here, I see it here, I see it here. It's like the same idea. But I have been feeling lately that maybe I haven't been extending enough independence or power. We've just been having more friction lately, more arguments. I've been just feeling more easily triggered. And I think just last week I came across this podcast on how to respond to backtalk and rudeness with your kid compassionately. And I'm like, oh boy, do I need this one, yo. So like it's been all bubbling up, right? So in that moment, right, like that feeling of conflict, and Krishna is there in these moments, and just leaning into it a little bit and trusting it a little bit more. I think I have a hard time trusting that inner instinct. Like I always feel uncertain and unsure. Yeah. But yeah, I was just like, trying to feel more secure in the fact that there is divinity within me. Yeah. And if I'm connected to it, it will guide me. It's there.
Yeah. I agree.
What's your takeaway? Like, what did you learn about yourself? What are you taking away from this whole situation?
The learnings for me here is that if I can just take a pause and take a breath and take a step back, and some of these steps that we talked about, maybe it could help me respond in a more, but still, authoritative way, whatever that looks like, whatever is needed for that moment.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'll say is that I was thinking about, this plant that Kishore brought home from school. Didn't make it, but it's, a sunflower seed that was sprouting. And when you're watering a seed, like when you're taking care of a child, you don't necessarily know like how things are going to turn out. Yeah. And when you're watering, it's more or less kind of like an act of faith. You're doing the work and not knowing like, and I was just thinking that parenting requires faith on many levels. Faith that, in our kids, like that they have needs or desires that might need to be accommodated in a reasonable way.
They're their own people.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Faith also in ourselves that like, I'm really trying to do my best, trying to hold myself accountable, get better.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the Lord in their heart can inspire them.
Yeah.
Or teach them, give realizations.
Yeah.
In this case, he slept the whole night.
Yeah.
And he woke up the next day and he was tired, but pretty much in the morning at some point, like he turned to us and...
Well, first we banned the box in the morning because it was going south.
We did say, we're not going to do the box anymore.
Because the tiredness was as predicted, very difficult to manage. So we were like, all right, we tried the box. Yeah. We talked about how you might feel tired and how there might be, it might end up hurting other people in the house if you can't control your tired body. Yeah. So no more box. But then it had to be on his terms, right? Because that's who he is. But 45 minutes later, he came to me quietly. He was like, Mama, I don't want to sleep in the box anymore because it's too uncomfortable. There's no more box.
What about you? What's your takeaway?
Yeah. Really, one important thing is I have these values of wanting to support my kids unconditionally, to be whoever they want, but I'm realizing how difficult that actually is when the kid that I have is different than what I thought it was going to be. And so I think I need to keep myself in check compassionately. And not in a bad way, but just reflect to make sure I'm staying aligned with my values. And that being said, like, even when I was like getting my thoughts together for this podcast, part of me was like, oh my gosh, you're so extra. Like, you're doing an entire podcast over your kid sleeping in a box. It kind of feels like overdone. But then there was another part of me that was like, wow, yeah, parenting offers me such an opportunity to really uncover and grow myself if I take the opportunity. And this was a moment, because it was so little, it's like, no, you're not sleeping in the box, like, end of story, right? Or go down the road of deeper reflection and invite Krishna in and kind of see what unfolds. And I feel like this was a growing moment for me.
Yeah.
So I guess you could sum it up and say parenting is the greatest opportunity to grow if I welcome it in that way. And to trust that Krishna is here with us on the journey.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks.
I'm glad we chatted about this box thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure this will not be the last of crazy requests that we get. It's going to get harder.
We have a crazy request series.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, thanks for listening. We would love to hear your thoughts, your reflections. Please do reach out if anything comes up for you while you were listening. If you have any similar experiences, it's really our favorite part of the podcast is when we hear from you and get to share. Thank you, and we will see you on our next episode. Hare Krishna, everybody.
Hare Krishna.